You're sitting on this gold mine. Your law firm and the 100 people here in this firm are actually doing some amazing things. Your markets need to know about this. You start with a Roux, and the Roux is kind of the foundation, and it's a couple of ingredients that you have to really nail perfectly for the gumbo to come out well. If you don't get it right, it screws everything else up. It starts calming people, actually, because they see it. It's not the days of long ago where it's, let's advertise and I don't know what portion of my budget works. There's a system in place and we know what we're doing. Great idea doesn't sometimes need as much money.
Sharp strategies, sweet success.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. You're listening to Sharp Strategies, Sweet Success. I'm your host, Tiffany Swedensky, and today I have with me Eric Morgan of Roux Advertising. This is actually the first time Eric and I are talking and getting acquainted, but we're both doing the marketing roundtables for PILMA this year. And between the three of us, including Cassidy Lewis, we've split up the responsibility of leading those meetings. And it's been super fun, although I just haven't gotten a chance to meet my fellow presenters. So we invited Eric on, and I'm going to let him introduce himself to our listeners. So Eric, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thanks a lot for hosting and inviting me. I always enjoy the opportunity. And like you said, it's the first time we've really spent any time communicating one-on-one. I think we've been on a Zoom together once or twice in a larger group. But yeah, it's great to talk and just sit down and share some ideas and thoughts about what's going on in the wonderful world of marketing. As you said, I'm Eric Morgan. I run Roux Advertising. We are a 29-year-old ad agency. We do an enormous amount of work in the legal marketing space, but we do have other areas. We have healthcare and tourism, hospitality, but we have a lot of tourism legal clients around the country. And the bulk of what we do is really media planning, buying on the digital and offline world. And we do creative in the legal space, video, design, billboard, things like that for our clients. But the bulk of what clients come to us for is really our media expertise. Again, the strategy, the planning, the buying, the audience analysis, the analytics. And we find ourselves spending a lot of time helping them. In a lot of cases, it's just alignment. They need help. Something's not working. And so it's reveal what doesn't work, how to fix it, what's the best way to fix it to get that revenue pumping again, and to connect the dots, really. They're spending money. They don't know what the performance looks like. They don't know what the outcome is. So we're there to help build that model that says, look, this is what you need to put in. And this is what you're going to get out. Here's how to measure it at each step. Here's what your team should be doing from a conversion standpoint. Here's what we should be doing from a marketing standpoint. So that way they have more clarity, honestly, on what's working, what's not working, what to fix first, and then how to get it to a point where it's just more smooth sailing and they have confidence in what their marketing is doing for them.
Well, let me ask you, I guess, a more basic question because we started to talk about this for the show, but how did you land on Roux Advertising? Is that a name you invented or did you inherit it? How'd that become the brand?
Actually, I created it. I'd had it for years and years. And most people will know us because we're 29 years old. For the first 27 or so of our years, we were Morgan and Company, Morgan and Co., some variation like that. Because, almost 30 years ago when we started, back then you put your name on the door. We had a partner, I had a partner, and, it was our last names, very law firm-ish, if you will. And as we've grown and evolved and, our clients are coast to coast, we've looked at how we work with people. Clients come to us because of our industry instinct, because we have this outcome first approach and we see media as a multiplier, and we end up becoming an extension of their team in a lot of cases, that we realized that we wanted a name and a brand that signified how we interact with people. And from being from South Louisiana, we have a lot of cooking going on down here. And one of the more common things is with gumbo and so forth, you start with a Roux, and the Roux is kind of the foundation. And it's a couple of ingredients that you have to really nail perfectly for the gumbo to come out well. If you don't get it right, it screws everything else up. And we just felt like the name made a lot of sense in terms of the relationship we have, the role we play, the idea that there's a foundation to the work that we're doing, and there's these ingredients that go in to make a successful outcome. And on top of that, it's fun. It's a lot more fun than Morgan & Co. So it was fitting. It represented who we are, where we're from, and the role we play.
You mentioned you also do work in the healthcare space. And then this is something I'm always curious about. I'm not exactly sure, but do you also talk to a lot of doctors the way you do lawyers?
It's different, actually. We learned a long, long time ago, a couple decades ago, that legal marketing is dramatically different than a lot of other marketing. That's kind of the fun part about it because, I grew up in the ad agency world as a media planner buyer. And then I've obviously evolved on to strategy and, some creative concepts. But the things that I grew up being taught and doing for traditional marketing clients and brands, it just doesn't apply as much to the legal marketing space. And so when we're talking to, hospitals and, we have a healthcare system that has 8 hospitals and they've got 20,000 employees. And when we're talking to them, that's a whole different kind of conversation. And that's a lot more, traditional marketing advertising speak that you would expect, a retail brand or a brand, consumer-oriented brand being following. But when you get to the legal space, it's night and day. And that's fine. We've mastered it. We mastered it a couple of decades ago, but it's just different. And so when we bring people on at Roux, onboarding them, it's like, okay, so there are these clients and this is marketing in their sense. And then there's the law firm clients. This is what marketing looks for them. And we're trying to get the same outcome, so to speak. For hospitals, we're trying to increase patient activity in the emergency department, foot traffic. For law firms, we're trying to make the phone ring with qualified cases that have value, and then show that value on their P&L. And so the big picture is similar, but when you kind of roll up your sleeves, it's very different in terms of the terminology, what we're looking at, the metrics, the language, the KPIs are all fairly different.
Because you said marketing is different for the groups. Could you give a more specific example? Is law firm marketing more Wild West than hospital marketing? You mentioned it was more traditional brand. Is it measured more tightly? I'm really curious about those differences.
Legal marketing is not wild, wild west. There is a level of structure to it. But back in the day, from advertising for traditional retail brands, you're looking at reach and frequency and impressions and the terminology and how we gauge some of I look at metrics and KPIs. There's ad metrics, reach and frequency, KPI, those kind of things. I look at creative, engagement rates and completion for videos and things like that. And then there's business metrics, patients or customers or clients or what have you. And so from an ad standpoint, those brands are still reach and frequency, where in legal speak, we don't talk about that, the reach and frequency as much. We are kind of rolling up our sleeves and talking more about what we call audience sizing, talking about a specific group of people that we want to talk to, and then conversion rates, because it's a very direct marketing kind of play. And it's not that for hospitals, even though it should be. And we've tried to bring some of those approaches and tactics to whether it's the hospitals or tourism or so forth. Because at the end of the day, we're selling product, we're selling services, we're selling something. And I think there's a lot of things that are fitting that work really well in the legal space that actually could work in other spaces because, we're trying to make the phone ring one way or another.
For media buying, are you doing TV, digital, billboard, or is it more of one or the other? Is a healthy mix?
We're equipped, staffed, and certified to do it all. So currently, we are buying TV in a bunch of markets around the country. We're buying a lot of billboard, a lot of digital. The digital is, search and social paid ads. We do a little bit of content for some clients, pre-roll video, streaming, OTT, just traditional display ads. We do a little bit of email marketing for some clients. We do radio for a couple of clients. We do some print, but not a lot. But the bulk of the work we're doing these days is digital, TV, and billboard. And it's dictated by our clients, what their needs are, the categories that they're in, and quite frankly, just the sign of the times, how people are getting information, what's shaping them.
Let's say you have a law firm that wants to get into mass media and they're open to OTT, billboards, PPC, search, or social, paid social, all that good stuff. What would you recommend that they look at? Let's say a $20,000 to $30,000 budget.
So what I would do is I'd probably back up a step, and I would back up a step, assuming that they're on board for this, and do just an analysis of their market, because when you mention TV or you mention billboard and all that stuff, there's 210 TV markets in the United States. And you got New York being number one and, some small area in Alaska being number 210. And everybody's a little different. Every market's just a tiny bit different. And it's a budget parameter as well. And so what I would do is an analysis of who are the players, what are their competitors looking like, what are the competitors are doing, what does the client currently have in place if they're doing any marketing, and what's the client trying to accomplish? I would rather see a client say to me, look, we normally take in about 50 cases a month and we want to get to 60. And so I'm going to go, all right, great, let's figure out where those initial 50 are coming from, and can we support it? Can we amplify some of those things that we're doing? And if it's, you got 20 grand that you want to spend, great. Let's figure out what's working currently. It's always challenging, really, because everybody wants to do the things that their competitors are doing. The law firm down the street's doing, or, I saw my competitor, wrapping a bus. Let's wrap a bus, or they're on search or whatever. And I get that urge, but what we're trying to do is turn this into a neutral kind of conversation to say, look, where do you stand? And how can you leverage that to your advantage? Meaning, what do you stand for? Who does this matter to? And who can you connect with? And so that's all part of like our brand realization program. And then, great, now that we understand what you stand for, who that audience is, let's figure out the channels that make the most sense for you. Because in a lot of cases, TV, just take it off the table. It's too expensive, you're in too big of a market, or you got to spend too much to yell and scream more than the competitors. But instead, it's let's figure out what makes you distinctive and then find that model that makes everything work. Meaning, if we're going to spend 10 grand or 20 grand or whatever that number is, all right, how many cases do we need on the back end? What's that conversion rate? Does client have everything set up so that way we can track everything? And if it is, then I'm going to start with, do we need to brand the firm and get some notoriety and recognition? Great. We're going to pick branding tactics. Maybe that is a cluster of billboards because, high reach, good repetition, geo-focused into, the northwest corner or the southwest corner of the city, of the market, and start picking. So it really is, while there is this model that we go through that's pretty standard, but it's very customized to each client. We have to go through certain steps, So TV is usually the last thing. I would love TV be the first because TV built this industry. We can make the phone ring, but it's just out of reach for most brands, and that's the challenge. There are cases where we can do very specific, very focused TV campaigns, but oftentimes we're going to look at some other offline, maybe billboard, with some digital in certain cases, whether that's some video or paid social ads that are pretty focused from a geographical standpoint, from an audience standpoint.
A lot of the law firms I've worked with previously, or a lot that I've talked to, they built up great practices because they get a bunch of referrals. And they're very digital mass media adverse because they say, like, the costs are too high. And I agree. I mean, costs for digital marketing are certainly going up. So I guess, what would you say to that attorney who's kind of dipping their toe in the idea of doing digital marketing or doing mass media, but is looking at cost per case and is thinking oh, I can just, get referrals from my buddy? What would you say to them?
So it's funny you bring that up because we did recently have a client like that, and it was a short-term engagement, and that was basically what they were focused on. They were heavy referral-based clientele, and that was great, and they've been successful at it for a bunch of years. But the reality is that they've gotten to the point where, one, they were concerned that the referrals might dry up one day because they are living at the mercy of somebody else, if they're referring attorneys and they got a bucket of them from one particular law firm, they decide to go in a different direction, then that source dries up. But two, and related, I guess, they wanted to control their own destiny and their own future. And so from us, and this is the beauty of, I guess, the evolution of our role and our side of the industry. The ad agency world, when I got into it in the 90s, it was selling TV commercials and print ads and, a little bit of digital in the early days. But now the conversation is more about, and you hit on it, cost per case. And I'm going, how many cases can you support right now? Let's figure out what's working currently. Let's figure out if currently is referral. Let's figure out how do we parlay that into something that's your own mechanism, if you will, building a system that makes sense. And then we go, what's the cost per case? Because then we start talking business. And it's not ad speak, it's not marketing speak. It's what's cost per case? What's the ideal client look like? How long does it take you to get paid from these clients or from obviously the settlement? And what does that look like? How long are you going to have to carry them? Is it 12 months? Is it 6 months? Is it 18 months? And so from an investment standpoint, we start looking at burn rate. We start looking at what it takes to market, how many people we need to put in the proverbial funnel, at what conversion rates and what they're going to get on the back end. And does that make sense from a business model? And they go, yep, great. Then let's kick it off. And if not, then we tweak it and figure out where it's going. But it is a giant step because it's one thing to have all of these referrals come through the door just because you knew somebody, y'all used to work together at a different firm and you're still their go-to guy. But it's completely different when all of a sudden you're the one that's got to drum up the business and you're the attorney that's got to make the phone ring and you've got to invest in marketing people like you and I to say, what's going to work best with my investment? Because they don't have, a completely blank check. They've got limitations, and more so if they're younger and they're newer. And so the money's precious. So I hear them. It's a leap of faith. But what we do is we go through all these motions and we go through predictions and we go through, if we're going to do these things, we're going to predict based on our knowledge, our history, as well as what you're already seeing from a conversion rate, that this is what the outcome is going to be. Because we've got clients where they'll say, all right, 30% of the cold leads or their leads are kind of lukewarm. They call, but once they qualify them, that they can convert up to 90% of qualified leads. They're killing it. And I'm like, great. So we know math. We then got the formula and the recipe. It's just now it's up to us to go, how many people do we need to put into that equation to get it to be a cost per case of what the client wants, whether it's $1,500 or $2,500 or $3,500 if they're in a really competitive market. And when we go through that exercise, it starts calming people actually because they see it. It's not the days of long ago where it's, well, let's advertise and let's, I don't know what portion of my budget works. Now it's this, wow, there's a system in place and we know what we're doing. We know what at each level should be coming out of it. And then we understand how to tweak it and how to adjust it to improve performance. So there is a level of safety nets there. There's a level of, all right, here's what you're buying yourself into and here's what it's going to look like. And here's the runway. They're at peace with that actually, because they can see what it's going to look like. It's like going to an architect and going, here's the blueprint of your future home. And you're like, oh, I can envision myself there.
Kind of incredible how much CPA's cost per cases have changed. And I'm glad you kind of mentioned the range because they can really be like 1,200 up to, it's edging closer to 4,000 depending on what you're looking at and what you're measuring.
I mean, we've got clients that are well under $1,000, $500, $600, $700. And we got clients that are, $300, $400. We got one client that just wanted to put their foot on the gas and they didn't really care, much as we tried to talk them out of it. They're $5,000 cost per case. And I'm like, are you sure this business model works for you? And they're like, don't worry, we know exactly what we're doing. I'm like, all right, but I'm going to put this in an email. I want this in writing on my position.
One thing I always kind of struggle to answer, and I'm mostly talking with marketers, not attorneys, but we'll talk about TV ads and the question will come up. It's like, well, TV ads are so expensive that it needs a big budget. And I don't know who actually watches them anymore. And, well, before I let you answer, like I'm starting to turn on that because like Prime has live channels and I'm hyping this up for no reason where I can select like the Star Trek channel and I see Star Trek episodes unlimited with commercials. And it's like, well, there's one place. But like, how do you explain that to marketers and attorneys who are just like, well, who watches TV? Why does it cost so much? Like, how do you explain that to them?
It is an ongoing conversation and it's a legitimate one because broadcast television, I'm old enough to remember rabbit ears and antennas and all that. It's not what it used to be. It was the big mass medium. It was the main thing. Then you had billboard and newspapers, and a little bit of billboard, but definitely newspapers. And while it's still a it's broadcast. It's still mass medium. It reaches every county in a DMA. It doesn't reach, 80, 95% of the households like it used to. It's probably around 50%, depending upon what streaming's doing. I think it was February, it picked back up to a little bit over 50%. A few months before that, it was 49 and some change percent. It's definitely not the way it used to be, but it still has significant, value. It still has significant reach. It's got, the emotional side. It's got the visual. It's got the audio. And the interesting thing is that while this sounds bad, the way I'm going to say it, it's actually a benefit to marketers. It's more of a passive type experience for the viewer than streaming is, because streaming is very active. You're watching it on your device, where you on, how long you on, and you want to be in that zone, and you're very much, I want to be left undisturbed. For that reason, streaming will never provide the results or the experience that broadcast television is. And I'm not saying that experience is different from, or good or better or worse than the other experience, but I'm saying the experience is different from a very active versus a very passive, where you're just sitting on the couch, scrolling through TV, watching, seeing what's on. When you start streaming, you're attached. You're doing it on your terms. And with each one of those experiences are particular outcomes that a law firm wants, whether that's brand recognition, affinity, maintaining the awareness, maintaining just that preference for the law firm brand, but most importantly, the phone call, all right? Depending upon what you do or which one you do, law firm clients are more or less likely to make a phone call during those different experiences. And that's the key, because people will do broadcasts and say, well, it's not that. I really want streaming because everybody's on streaming. I'm going, yeah, but the experience is different. And so your phone call volume is going to be different. And I'm not meaning that in a very good way. Broadcast television, it's still got some clout. It's still a mass reach. Anybody can be hit by, a company truck tomorrow, be T-boned, be injured and need an attorney. So there's value there. And it does absolutely pay dividends. I mean, it built the industry and it still has a lot of value. But it's a legitimate question. We have to explain it a lot, and fine, because, it makes the conversation very interesting. Now, I'm not saying that streaming online video doesn't have value. It has value, but for a different role.
That honestly makes a ton of sense to me, because if you're talking about like YouTube or ads on Hulu and you're watching The Pit, I've actually never seen that. I'm just hearing about it a lot. And you have a streaming platform where you see ads, you hit skip just the immediate moment that you can. But there are lots of places, like I mentioned, like Prime has like live stream channels. There's also Shout, which has several almost public domain streaming channels that you could watch. It's almost like old school 90s cable TV. It is almost nostalgic. Like, sometimes I watch it, just for the experience of seeing a show start and end, ad breaks. That's what it was like when I was a kid. But, I spent half my Saturday with Antiques Roadshow playing in the background. Amazon Prime, and I saw a bunch of commercials. It was very passive. Like you said, I was doing chores. I was cleaning the windows, but, I probably heard 3 or 4 brands mentioned 3 or 4 times on these streaming channels. And so that might potentially influence my choice if I need a service and I don't know of any. I've heard that name a bunch.
And that's what we're going for. There's so much competition in a lot of these categories that in our mind, we're focusing on this decision moment, and everything we do is around that decision moment, because, if we can win the decision moment for our brand, then the brand gets chosen, and then that choice, that action is going to show up in revenue on a P&L. And so the whole brand, making sure that it's always there, top of mind, people are considering it. There's an affinity, there's a relationship, there's a preference for it. Because as I say, at a certain moment, somebody's going to make a decision, and are they going to think of your brand? And that's what it's all about. And so if you're saying you're watching an Antique Roadshow, then you see a couple of brands pop in, it's just that. We want the clients that we work with, we want those brands to win that mind share. And then if they can win that mind share, then they can own the market space.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll have to think about that too, because the whole different experiences and different outcomes just make so much sense to me. Let's say somebody is looking at doing billboards in a very competitive state for billboards. I was going to pick Missouri, but that's not that competitive. Let's say South Carolina. Somebody comes to you with wanting a design for a billboard, and what they want is kind of bland. And if you've been through South Carolina, you've seen South Carolina billboards. They're just wacky and wild sometimes. How are you going to advise like a law firm that maybe has a more polished appearance how to stand out in kind of a billboard landscape like South Carolina?
You're funny you bring up South Carolina because we were talking about that a week and a half ago. We kind of take the client through a couple of questions and a little bit of an exercise because we're ultimately trying to, again, own that decision moment and be that brand of preference. And so we've got a little bit of an exercise that we go through and try and gauge the client's tolerance, if you will, on how much we can push the envelope. And I'm not saying push the envelope to where the client's on a billboard, swinging a chainsaw, but I am saying that has to be something distinctive. We've heard the old thing about, well, you take the billboard and you can put anybody's logo on that. And we're definitely trying to avoid that. There's a couple of exercises, and we went through one last week with a client where it turns out that there's so many things that this client was doing that were amazing that they're just talking about, hey, call me if you're injured kind of a thing, pretty standard stuff. And nothing wrong with that. But I'm going, you're sitting on this gold mine. Your law firm and the 100 people here in this firm are actually doing some amazing things. Your markets need to know about this. And so this exercise of just asking some questions and feeling around what they are, what their culture is all about, then all of a sudden turned it from being, y'all are a law firm that, yes, legal representation gets the settlement, the money that the injured deserve, but there's so much more to it. And that all of a sudden became a distinction that the client can run with, and it's going to make them set up, stand above and beyond so many other people. So I was pretty excited about that conversation last week.
That is so important because I'm thinking about the law firms that I know that really took off in the mass media space. I'm hesitant to use the word hook, just the way it's used in social media marketing these days, but they definitely had a brand hook that made them distinctive and made them stand out, and it gave people something to talk about. And without it, would they have made a splash the way they did in their marketplace? Maybe, maybe not. Because there are some things budget can't compensate for, I believe. You can put a lot of money into a really boring, bad idea, unfortunately.
And a great idea doesn't sometimes need as much money.
So we're coming to the end of our show. Was there anything that you were hoping to talk about that we didn't get to?
We talked a lot about offline TV, billboard and all. And a lot of these things, we mentioned OTT and streaming, a lot of these principles and practices really work in the digital world as well in terms of being distinctive, owning that decision moment, connecting, marketing investment to revenue. And so it's the same story in a lot of cases, and it can do well. And fortunately for the internet, that often ends up being the starting point for a lot of younger brands, a lot of younger law firms out there, because they've got to get their toe in the water. They got to get a little bit of momentum. They've got to find their distinctive space in that market where they can own it and they can generate a little bit of revenue. And then they start the flywheel. If you've read a Jim Collins book, you start that flywheel that gets you the momentum you need. And digital is fantastic. And all I'd say is there's a lot of things that they can do on their own. And I call it getting their house in order. And I'm sure you got a lot of experience in the digital world, though. There's so many things that just need to happen that they can do themselves to help their own brand.
Well, and I guess I didn't ask you many digital marketing questions because I tell us a little bit of people who do a lot of mass media and have experience there. I'm trying to get as much information as I can because for me, that's an exciting, unexplored frontier. So I just get kind of drilled into that, unfortunately. Like you said, I feel like a lot of marketers get started in the digital space. I was thinking about that. It's probably different back in the day, but these days, most of the marketers I talk to talking about social media, they're talking about Google, they're talking about local service ads. Honestly, I guess at a certain point, it gets boring. And I'm kind of glad AI disrupted Google the way it did because maybe this is just my personal belief, but it seems like law firms are finally kind of diversifying out of that SEO space and looking at stuff they've ignored for a few years, like,
Mhm.
mass media, because digital marketing seemed so much more efficient and cheaper. I don't know. I think that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, it is. And that's the beauty of this industry. I love it. I've been doing this over 30 years. It seems like every day is a new day and you don't know what's going to happen and what's going to change. And that's what makes it fun.
Eric, thank you so much for being on the show. Where do you want people to look you up and learn more about you?
Go to rouxadvertising.com, ROUX advertising. We're on all the usual social media profiles. Look for Eric Morgan or just email me, eric@rouxadvertising.com. Call me anytime, pick my brain. Happy to talk.
And that's one thing I don't like about talking with you Louisiana people is I always end up hungry because now I just have it in my heart. I got to go make a good roux so I can make a good gumbo.
Yeah. And, I know this is recorded, but right now, tomorrow kicks off Jazz Fest for this weekend and next weekend. So a lot of great food and a lot of great music.
Jealous. I am jealous, honestly. I need to take a trip. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we will see everyone next time. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you, Tiffany. Enjoyed it.